The small town of Brookhaven had always been peaceful, almost idyllic, nestled away from the bustling world outside. Its cobbled streets were lined with quaint houses, each telling its own story. The townsfolk knew one another by name, and life seemed to move at a steady, predictable pace. But everything began to change when Victor Armstrong arrived. Victor was a man of mystery, with dark eyes that seemed to see right through people. He moved into the old mansion at the edge of town, a dilapidated building with a history as murky as the fog that often blanketed it. No one knew much about him. He kept to himself, never ventured into town, and most unsettling of all, no one could quite remember how he had even arrived. It was as if he had simply materialized out of thin air. As the days passed, strange events began to unfold. First, it was the disappearance of two local children. They vanished without a trace, and the search efforts yielded no clues. Then the weather turned unnaturally erratic. One moment, the town was bathed in sunshine, and the next, an unrelenting fog settled in, refusing to lift for days. This was only the beginning. For Emma Cunningham, the town's historian, the strange happenings were hard to ignore. She had always believed there was more to Brookhaven's past than the townsfolk realized. And when the disappearances and the mysterious weather patterns started, her curiosity got the best of her. She made her way toward Victor's mansion, hoping to uncover the truth hidden there. Emma stepped cautiously into the mansion, the heavy door creaking as it closed behind her. The air was thick with the smell of decay, a mixture of damp wood and mildew. As her flashlight flickered to life, she scanned the dark hallway. The silence was oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She felt a sudden chill creep up her spine, but she couldn't turn back now. She had to know what Victor Armstrong was hiding. The hallway was lined with old portraits, their subjects' faces blurred with age and dust. At the far end of the corridor, a wooden door stood slightly ajar. Emma's curiosity got the better of her, and she pushed it open. Inside, a large study stretched before her, its shelves stacked with dusty books and old maps. On the far side of the room was a desk, covered in papers. Some were neatly stacked, while others seemed to have been carelessly thrown about. The most striking thing, however, was the collection of old photographs pinned to the wall. The faces of the people in the photographs were unfamiliar, but their eyes, there was something unsettling about them. Some seemed to stare directly at her, their gazes following her every movement. Emma approached the desk and noticed a large leather-bound journal resting on top of the papers. As she opened it, the first page revealed a name, Victor Armstrong. Her heart skipped a beat. She flipped through the pages, finding maps, strange symbols, and notes that made no sense. The deeper she went, the more she began to realize that the disappearances and the strange events in Brookhaven were all connected to Victor. But what was he planning? As Emma flipped through the pages of the journal, her eyes grew wider with every line. Victor's handwriting was erratic, the words frantic and hurried, as if he was trying to document something before it was too late. There were references to occult rituals, forbidden knowledge, and dates that matched the disappearances in town. Emma's hands trembled as she read about dark forces that could bend reality itself. One entry stood out. The time is almost upon us. The ritual must be completed before the full moon. Brookhaven is the key. Everything I have worked for will come to fruition, and no one can stop it. Emma's blood ran cold. She had known there was something off about Victor, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. If Victor was trying to complete some kind of ritual, it could mean the end of Brookhaven, and maybe even something far worse. Suddenly, Emma heard a noise behind her, a soft shuffle, followed by the creak of floorboards. She froze. Was someone else here? She turned around quickly, but the room remained silent. The hair on the back of her neck stood up as she realized she wasn't alone. Emma slowly turned around, her heart pounding in her chest. The door to the study was open now, and she could hear the unmistakable sound of someone approaching. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing louder by the second. She wasn't alone. From the shadows a figure emerged, Victor Armstrong, his tall frame looming in the doorway. His dark eyes locked onto Emma's, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. She could feel the weight of his presence, like a predator closing in on its prey. Victor didn't speak immediately. He simply stood there, watching her, his face unreadable. Emma felt the tension in the room thickening, the air growing heavier. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught in her throat. "You shouldn't have come here," Victor finally said, his voice soft but filled with an eerie calm. "You've seen too much already. Now, you must leave." Emma stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching for her phone, but she knew it wouldn't help. Victor was more than just a man. He was something else entirely. Victor took a step forward, and Emma instinctively took a step back. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the suffocating pressure of his presence. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing in from all sides. There was nowhere to run. "You don't understand, do you?" Victor's voice was calm, almost patronizing. "Everything that's happening in this town, these disappearances, the strange weather, it's all part of something far bigger than you can comprehend. You think you're here to stop me, but you're too late." Emma's pulse quickened. She had to get out of there. She had to warn the others. But Victor's eyes never left hers, and she felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. "What are you planning?" Emma demanded, her voice trembling despite herself. "What are you doing to this town?" Victor smiled, his expression dark and knowing. "You'll see soon enough, but by then, it will be too late." With those chilling words, he turned and walked back into the shadows, leaving Emma standing there, more uncertain than ever about what was really happening in Brookhaven. Emma's breath caught in her throat, as Victor's figure disappeared into the darkness of the mansion. She was paralyzed for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had come here to uncover the truth, but now she felt like a pawn in a much larger, far more dangerous game. She couldn't stay. She had to leave and warn the others. But before she could move, she heard it. A low hum, a vibration that seemed to resonate through the very walls of the mansion. It was as though the house itself was alive, and it was waking up. Emma ran for the door, but as she reached for the handle, the lights flickered and went out. The mansion was plunged into darkness. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking, but the screen remained black. Suddenly, the hum grew louder, and Emma felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She wasn't alone. Victor had been right. She had seen too much. Emma stood frozen in the dark, her heart racing. The mansion seemed to breathe around her, the walls creaking and groaning, as if they had come alive. The low hum she had heard earlier grew louder, vibrating through the very floor beneath her feet. Panic surged through her chest as she fumbled for her phone. The screen remained black, but she could feel something, someone, watching her. She had to get out. The air felt thicker, heavier, almost suffocating. She turned toward the door, but before she could reach it, a cold gust of wind slammed it shut with a deafening bang. The force rattled the old wood, and Emma recoiled in fear, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Victor's warning echoed in her mind, the cruel certainty of his words. "You've seen too much already. Now, you must leave." But it was too late for that. She had uncovered a piece of something far darker than she could have imagined. And now, there was no turning back. With no other option, Emma sprinted for the back door. She needed to escape, to warn the town before it was too late. As she reached the back of the mansion, she pushed the door open with all her strength and stepped out into the fog-choked yard. Emma's feet pounded against the damp ground, her lungs burning with each breath. The thick fog enveloped her, making it almost impossible to see anything beyond a few feet ahead. She could barely hear the sound of her own footsteps over the deafening silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the mansion behind her. The weight of her thoughts was suffocating. She had to make sense of everything she had uncovered. There was a connection, something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined, but what? Suddenly the mist parted, and Emma stumbled onto the path that led into the woods. It was her only chance to lose herself in the thick trees and make her way back to town unnoticed. As she ran deeper into the woods, her mind raced. She couldn't shake the image of Victor's cold smile, nor the terror that had gripped her when she realized just how deeply entangled he was in the town's fate. She had to get to the sheriff. He had to know what was going on. But just as she thought she was free, a low, guttural growl echoed through the trees. Emma froze. Someone was out there. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she heard the growl again, louder this time. It was coming from the trees, but she couldn't see anything through the dense fog. Panic surged through her veins. She had to keep moving, had to make it to safety. Her feet carried her forward, but the ground was uneven, and she tripped over roots and rocks, her body crashing to the cold earth. She gasped in pain as her knees scraped against the ground, but there was no time to stop. She pushed herself up, scrambling to her feet. The growl was closer now, and she could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. A shadow flickered between the trees. Emma's pulse quickened, her instinct screaming at her to run, but she could barely make out the shape moving toward her. She didn't know what it was, but it wasn't human. Her heart raced as she turned and fled through the trees, her mind clouded with fear. But as she ran, she felt the sensation of something following her, getting closer and closer, the growls growing louder, more insistent. Emma's chest heaved as she stumbled through the forest, the growls behind her echoing in her ears. She had no idea what was chasing her, but she couldn't afford to stop and look back. She had to get away. The trees seemed to stretch on forever, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. Just as her legs began to give out, she saw it, a flickering light in the distance. It was the town. The lights of Brookhaven were visible through the trees, like a beacon of safety. She pushed herself harder, forcing her legs to move despite the exhaustion weighing her down. But the growl had turned into a snarl now, a sound so deep and primal that it sent a wave of terror crashing through her. Whatever was behind her was getting closer, and the light from the town seemed to move further away with every step she took. The sound of snapping twigs and a loud rustle in the underbrush told her she wasn't alone anymore. Whatever it was closing in fast. Emma could hear its breath, hot and labored. She glanced over her shoulder just in time to see a large, dark shape spring from the trees, its eyes glowing in the fog. Emma screamed and sprinted faster, the sound of the creature's footsteps growing louder, echoing in her ears. She was so close now, just a few yards from the safety of the town's edge. But the creature was relentless. Its growls were deafening, and Emma could feel the ground shake with every step it took. She stumbled over a rock and fell hard to the ground, her hands scraping the dirt. She looked up, terrified, to see the creature closing in. Its eyes were glowing with a sinister, unnatural light, and its massive form loomed over her like an impending storm. But just as she thought it was over, a loud gunshot rang through the air. The creature froze, its glowing eyes flickering as it turned toward the sound. Another shot echoed, this time closer. The creature hissed and retreated into the woods, disappearing into the fog. Emma looked up to see Sheriff Carter, his hand steady as he lowered his rifle. "Get up," he said urgently, pulling her to her feet. "This town's in more danger than you realize. We need to get inside." The sheriff led Emma back toward town, his steps brisk and purposeful. The weight of what had just happened hung heavy in the air, but Emma couldn't bring herself to speak. She was still processing everything she had seen, everything she had barely escaped. They reached the sheriff's car, and he ushered her inside. As the engine roared to life, Emma glanced back toward the woods, but the fog had swallowed everything. There was no sign of the creature, no trace of what had been stalking her. But she knew it was still out there. "That thing," Emma said, her voice shaking. "What was it?" Sheriff Carter didn't answer right away. He was looking out the windshield, his eyes dark with worry. "We're not dealing with just one problem here, Emma. What you've uncovered, it's part of something much bigger, and it's not just the townspeople who are at risk. We're all in danger." Emma turned to him, confused. "What do you mean? What's really going on?" The sheriff finally met her gaze, his expression grave. "You were right to come to me, but now we need to figure out just how deep this goes, because whatever Victor Armstrong is planning, It's not just the town that's at stake. The sheriff's car roared down the fog-drenched streets of Brookhaven, the tires skimming over the damp road as Emma sat beside him, trying to make sense of the terrifying events she had witnessed. The air was heavy with tension, the only sound, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of the police radio. Emma's mind raced with questions, but none of them had answers. What was Victor Armstrong trying to do? Why had he come to this quiet town? And most importantly, what was that creature? Sheriff Carter's jaw was clenched as he drove, his hands tightly gripping the wheel. He had always been a man of few words, but Emma could tell that he was rattled. He knew more than he was letting on, and she had the feeling that whatever he wasn't saying was even worse than what she already knew. "We're going to head to the station," he said after a long pause, his voice low. "We need to figure out how to stop this before it gets worse. And we need to bring in the others." Emma nodded, though she didn't know who the others were. She felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. Whatever Victor was planning, it was already in motion. And no one in Brookhaven was safe. They reached the sheriff's station within minutes, the building dark and quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaos Emma felt inside. As they pulled up, Emma noticed several patrol cars parked in front of the station. The doors were open, and officers were huddled together in hushed conversation, their faces grim. The weight of the situation was starting to settle over the whole town, and Emma could feel the tension thickening in the air. Sheriff Carter didn't waste any time. He led Emma inside, and the officers immediately stood up, saluting him. It was clear that they had been expecting him. One of the officers, a young man with a nervous look in his eyes, approached Carter. "Sir," he said in a hushed voice, "we've been monitoring strange activity near Victor Armstrong's mansion. It's getting worse. People have been seeing things. Shadows, movements in the windows, and the local weather station reported an abnormal drop in temperature near the property." Carter nodded, his face hardening. "I know, it's not just the mansion anymore. We've got a bigger problem than that." Emma watched the exchange, feeling her stomach tighten. This was no longer just about missing children and strange weather. Whatever was happening in Brookhaven was part of something much darker, and it was spreading fast. Sheriff Carter motioned for Emma to follow him to a back room where a map of Brookhaven was spread out on the table, dotted with pins and notes. He looked at Emma with a sense of urgency. "This is where things get complicated," he began. "Victor Armstrong's arrival wasn't a coincidence. He's part of something much bigger, something that's been brewing for years." Emma stepped closer to the map, her eyes scanning the locations marked with red pins. She recognized the places, sites of the strange disappearances, the locations where people had reported seeing shadows or hearing unexplainable noises. But there was one place she didn't recognize. A clearing in the woods marked with a black X. "What's this?" she asked, pointing to the marked spot. Sheriff Carter's face darkened. "That's where it all started. There's something buried there, a ritual site. It's tied to everything happening in this town." Emma's pulse quickened. "A ritual site? What kind of ritual?" "We're still piecing that together," Carter said, his voice low. "But it has something to do with an ancient cult, one that believed in harnessing dark forces to gain power. Victor's role in all this is pivotal. He's been using the mansion to conduct experiments, and from what we can tell, those experiments are tied to the creature you saw tonight." Emma's eyes widened. "You mean that thing was part of the experiment?" Carter nodded slowly. "Exactly. And if we don't stop it, whatever Victor is trying to do will destroy this town. And possibly more." Emma's mind reeled as she took in the implications of what Sheriff Carter was telling her. An ancient cult? Dark forces? It was like something out of a nightmare, but she knew it was real. The creature, the disappearances, the strange weather, it was all connected to Victor Armstrong's twisted experiments. But what kind of power was he trying to summon, and why? "We needed to go to that site," Emma said, determination flooding her voice. "If there's a ritual there, we have to stop it." Carter shook his head. "It's too dangerous. We don't know what we're up against, and we can't risk more lives." "We don't have a choice," Emma insisted. "You said it yourself. If we don't stop him, Brookhaven could be destroyed. We need to find out what's really happening, and we need to do it now." The sheriff hesitated, but then nodded. "All right. We'll go together. But you stay close to me, and you don't go off on your own." Emma agreed, and together they made plans to head into the woods at dawn. But as they prepared to leave, a loud crash echoed from outside the station. The sound was followed by a piercing shriek, one that sent chills down Emma's spine. The creature was closer than they thought. The loud crash outside the station sent Emma's heart racing. She and Sheriff Carter rushed to the door, bursting out into the dim light of the street. The fog had thickened, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. But Emma could hear it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps, the growls, and the frantic rustling of leaves. Emma looked toward the woods, and in the distance, she could make out the shape of something moving swiftly through the trees. It was too dark and too far to see clearly, but she could feel the terror rising in her chest. It was the creature, and it was coming straight for them. "We need to move now," Sheriff Carter barked, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward his car. They didn't have time to waste. As they sprinted to the car, the creature's growls grew louder, echoing through the town like a warning. The sound of its approach seemed to shake the very air around them. Emma's pulse was racing, but she didn't dare stop. Whatever was happening in Brookhaven was escalating, and there was no more time to waste. They had to stop Victor Armstrong before it was too late. The engine of the police car roared to life, and Emma's heart raced as they sped away from the station. The creature's growls echoed in the distance, but they were getting farther away. For now. Sheriff Carter didn't say a word, his eyes locked on the road ahead, his expression grim. Emma glanced at the rear-view mirror, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw something dark and massive, moving through the fog, following them. She quickly turned her gaze away, not wanting to believe it. But deep down, she knew it was true. The creature was still out there, and it was getting closer. They headed straight for the woods. Sheriff Carter wasn't taking any chances. They had to reach the clearing, the ritual site, before Victor could complete whatever dark plan he had in motion. Emma wasn't sure what to expect when they arrived, but she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. As the trees grew denser and the fog thickened, Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. Something was coming. And it wasn't just the creature. The police car skidded to a halt near the edge of the woods, the tires kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. Sheriff Carter threw the car into park, and both he and Emma scrambled out, their boots crunching against the dry earth beneath them. The dense fog hung in the air, wrapping around the trees like a living entity, swallowing them whole. They didn't speak as they made their way toward the clearing. Emma could feel the weight of the air pressing against her chest, the silence almost suffocating. The forest felt different here, darker, more oppressive. It was as if the trees themselves were watching them, and the ground beneath their feet pulsed with something unnatural. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, but when she turned to look behind them, all she could see was the thick fog. She had no idea what they were up against, but she was sure of one thing: whatever Victor had started here, it was going to be worse than anything they could imagine. Sheriff Carter led the way, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "Stay close, and whatever you do, don't wander off." The clearing felt ancient, as though it had been forgotten by time itself. In the center, a circle of stones lay scattered across the ground, each one worn and weathered by centuries of exposure. Some were cracked, others covered in moss, but all were arranged in a deliberate pattern. A chill ran down Emma's spine as she realized what they were standing in the middle of: a ritual site, just as Sheriff Carter had said. The air felt thick with energy, almost as if the ground itself was alive, pulsing beneath their feet. Emma's eyes were drawn to the center of the circle, where a large stone altar stood, covered in dark stains. The smell of decay was strong here, as if something had been sacrificed to whatever ancient forces had once ruled this land. "This is it," Sheriff Carter murmured, his voice grim. "This is where it all started." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She knew they had to stop whatever Victor was planning, But what could they possibly do against something so ancient and powerful? Sheriff Carter knelt beside one of the stones, his hands brushing the surface. "These stones were placed here long ago," he said, his voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "They're part of an ancient ritual, a summoning circle. Whoever built this site believed that they could draw power from forces beyond this world." Emma stepped closer, her eyes scanning the area. "But what does Victor want with this? Why is he using this ritual site?" Carter stood up, his face dark with concern. "Victor's been trying to harness that power for years. The mansion, the strange weather, the creatures, it's all connected. This ritual site, it's the key. He's planning something far worse than we imagined. If he completes the ritual, it could open a gateway to something we can't control." Emma's heart skipped a beat. A gateway to what? Carter didn't answer right away, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the altar. "I don't know. But I have a feeling that whatever it is, it's not something we want to find out." Suddenly the ground beneath them trembled, sending vibrations through the earth. The fog thickened even more, swirling around them like an oppressive, suffocating cloud. Emma's pulse quickened, and she looked around in panic. A low rumbling sound echoed through the clearing, rising in intensity, until it felt as if the earth itself was groaning. Emma felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as the fog thickened even more, rolling in from every direction. It was as if the entire forest was closing in on them. The trees creaked and groaned in the wind, their branches swaying unnaturally. Then, through the thick fog, Emma saw it, a dark figure emerging from the shadows. At first, she thought it was Victor, but as it stepped into the clearing, she realized it was something far worse. The figure was tall, its form shifting and rippling as though it were made of smoke. Its face was a twisted, distorted mask of human features, glowing with an unnatural cold light. The creature stepped closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Its eyes locked onto Emma with a predatory gaze, sending a wave of terror crashing through her. "Victor," she whispered under her breath. But it wasn't Victor. It was something worse. The creature's eyes glowed with an eerie cold light, its form shifting like smoke. As it moved closer, the temperature dropped even further, and Emma could feel the frost creeping into her bones. The fog seemed to thicken, turning into a dense mist that obscured everything beyond a few feet. Sheriff Carter stepped forward, his hand on his gun, but the creature didn't seem to be fazed. "Stay back," Carter warned, his voice strained with fear. "That thing is a product of the ritual. It's not fully alive, but it's not completely dead either. We can't fight it the way we'd fight a normal enemy." Emma swallowed hard, trying to keep her fear at bay. She knew they couldn't just stand there. They had to do something. "We need to stop the ritual," Emma said, her voice trembling. "If we don't, whatever Victor is trying to summon will destroy us all." The creature growled low, the sound vibrating through the ground as if it was mocking them. It took another step forward, and Emma could feel the ground tremble beneath her feet. "We need to destroy the altar," Carter said, his voice filled with determination. "That's the source of the power. If we destroy it, we can stop whatever Victor's trying to bring through." Emma nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no time to waste. With the creature closing in, they had to act quickly. Sheriff Carter and Emma moved quickly, rushing toward the stone altar. The creature loomed behind them, its growls growing louder as it stalked them, its every movement sending shivers through Emma's spine. The air was thick with energy, and the ground beneath them felt like it was pulsing with dark power. They reached the altar, and Emma could feel the cold energy radiating off it. Her fingers brushed the rough stone, and she could almost hear whispers, voices from another world, beckoning her to join them. The sound was unbearable, like 1,000 voices crying out in unison. Sheriff Carter grabbed a heavy rock and swung it at the altar, smashing it with all his might. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, and Emma felt a sudden sharp pain in her chest. The ground beneath them trembled again, more violently this time, as if the ritual was fighting back. The creature screeched, a bone-chilling sound that made Emma's blood run cold. They were running out of time. The altar had to be destroyed, Now. With every blow to the altar, the creature's screech grew louder, more intense, reverberating through the air and making the ground shake beneath their feet. The fog swirled violently around them as if the very atmosphere was being torn apart. Emma's heart raced, and her hands trembled with the effort of helping Sheriff Carter smash the altar. The stone cracked with each hit, the sound echoing in the clearing like a death knell. But the altar was stubborn, refusing to break apart. Emma could feel the energy from the ritual's site surge through the air, thick and oppressive, as if the very earth was fighting to protect the dark power Victor Armstrong was trying to summon. "We need more power," Carter grunted, raising his arm to strike again. "We can't do this with brute force." Emma looked around desperately. The creature was still circling, growing bolder with each passing second. Its glowing eyes were locked onto them, its growls more ferocious. The last thing she wanted was to fight the creature while trying to destroy the altar, but they didn't have a choice. If they didn't act fast, they'd all be lost. The ground shook again, more violently this time, and Emma stumbled, almost falling as the tremors reverberated through her body. The air felt electric, like a storm was brewing right above them. She could barely think over the deafening sound of the creature's growls, but her mind was racing. There had to be something they could do. There had to be a way to stop the ritual before it was too late. "Wait," Emma whispered, eyes scanning the clearing. She had an idea, one that had been growing in the back of her mind as they worked to destroy the altar. It was a desperate move, but it might just work. She turned to Sheriff Carter, her voice urgent. "The stones. The circle. If we destroy the altar, we also need to disrupt the energy of the circle. It's the foundation of the ritual. If we break the connection between the stones and the altar, it might stop the ritual." Carter's eyes narrowed, his mind catching up. "I think you're right. Let's do it." They turned their attention to the stones. Emma grabbed one of the larger rocks from the ground and hurled it at the nearest stone in the circle, striking it with all her might. The ground trembled again, and this time a shockwave seemed to ripple outward, snapping the connection between the stones. As the rock hit the stone, a blinding flash of light erupted from the circle. Emma stumbled back, her eyes squinting against the intensity of the burst. For a moment, everything was silent. The creature's growl stopped mid-roar, and the oppressive fog around them seemed to lift slightly. The air was charged with an electric hum, and Emma could feel the tension in the atmosphere begin to release. Sheriff Carter gripped his gun tightly, watching the creature warily. The light from the ritual site flickered, and Emma could see cracks forming in the stones of the circle. Something had changed. The ritual's grip on the town was weakening, but they couldn't stop yet. "We need to keep going," Carter said through clenched teeth, his voice strained. "We've disrupted the power, but we need to finish it, now." Before Emma could respond, the creature let out a screech that rattled her bones. It charged at them with unnatural speed, its form shifting and writhing in the fog. Emma's heart raced as she realized that destroying the altar alone wouldn't stop it. It was the manifestation of the ritual's power. They had to finish what they started. The creature lunged toward them, its claws slashing through the fog. Emma's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't have time to be afraid. As the creature's form rushed toward her, her instincts kicked in. She grabbed another stone from the circle and hurled it at the creature, aiming for its glowing eyes. The stone connected with a sickening thud, and the creature screeched, reeling back in pain. But it didn't stop. Sheriff Carter raised his gun and fired, his shot landing square in the creature's chest. The creature faltered, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out an ear-splitting roar that made Emma's teeth ache. It was relentless, fueled by the dark energy of the ritual. "We need to destroy the center stone," Emma shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "It's the heart of the circle. It has to be the last piece." Sheriff Carter nodded grimly, his hand tightening around the grip of his gun. "Cover me," he said. "I'll take out the center stone. You need to keep it off me." Emma stepped forward, grabbing a nearby branch as she tried to push the creature back. Her arms were trembling, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her. She knew they couldn't afford to fail. If they didn't finish this now, everything they had worked for would be lost. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto Emma, and it let out another roar, its claws slashing through the air. It was faster now, more desperate. Every movement was driven by the dark energy of the ritual, and Emma could feel the ground shaking with the force of its power. She swung the branch at the creature, managing to push it back for a few moments, but it was relentless. The creature slashed at her with razor-sharp claws, and Emma barely managed to dodge, feeling the wind from its swipe cut across her face. Meanwhile, Sheriff Carter had reached the center stone. He was using the rifle's butt to smash the stone, his efforts frantic. Emma's heart raced as the creature lunged at her again. She had to buy him more time. With a burst of adrenaline, she dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's strike. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes locked on Carter, who was still struggling to break the center stone. Time was running out. "Carter, hurry!" she yelled, her voice strained with panic. With one final powerful strike, Sheriff Carter's rifle hit the center stone. The impact sent a shockwave through the clearing, and the creature let out a horrible, guttural scream. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The fog lifted, and the ground stopped shaking. The creature's form began to distort, its dark energy unraveling as the stone shattered. Emma watched in disbelief as the creature's body began to disintegrate, the dark energy that had once held it together dissipating into the night. The creature's screeching faded into silence, and the oppressive weight of the fog lifted. It was over. Sheriff Carter lowered his rifle, his breathing heavy, his face pale from the exertion. Emma's legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to the ground, her body trembling with the shock of what had just happened. The ritual was broken, the creature destroyed, but there was no doubt in Emma's mind that the consequences of Victor Armstrong's actions would ripple through Brookhaven forever. As the first light of dawn began to break through the mist, Emma knew their fight was far from over. The first rays of dawn broke through the dissipating fog, casting an eerie golden glow over the clearing. Emma sat on the cold ground, her body trembling with exhaustion. She had never felt so drained in her life, the adrenaline of the battle now giving way to a deep, bone-weary fatigue. Her fingers were numb, her mind spinning with the surreal events she had just witnessed. They had done it. The creature was gone, the ritual was destroyed, but the cost of it all was clear. Sheriff Carter stood nearby, his face set in grim determination as he surveyed the clearing. He was still gripping his rifle, though it seemed like he wasn't sure what to do with it now that the immediate danger had passed. His brow furrowed as he turned toward Emma, his expression hardened by years of experience. "We stopped it," he said, his voice heavy. "But this..." He gestured toward the clearing. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Emma looked at him, her heart sinking. "What do you mean?" "The ritual's power might be gone, but Victor Armstrong's legacy is still out there. There's more to this than we've uncovered." As the first light of morning stretched across Brookhaven, Emma stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from her pants. Her head was still reeling from the night's events, and the sense of dread hadn't completely lifted. Though the creature was gone and the ritual had been halted, the air still felt thick, as though something else, something darker, was lingering in the town. Sheriff Carter's words echoed in her mind. "There's more to this than we've uncovered." "How much worse can it get?" Emma asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Carter turned, his eyes somber as he met her gaze. "You think this was just about Victor Armstrong and his experiments?" "No. The town's history runs much deeper than that. Armstrong was only a piece of a much larger puzzle, one that stretches back centuries." Emma felt a chill at his words, the fog around her starting to feel heavier, as though it wasn't just a physical presence, but something more insidious. "We need to go to the town archives," Carter said, his voice firm. "There's information there. Information I've kept locked away. But now, we need to face the truth." They made their way through the town in silence, the streets eerily quiet, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The fog was beginning to lift, but a sense of unease still hung in the air. Emma's steps felt heavy as she walked beside Sheriff Carter. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something lurking just beyond the edges of their understanding, something still waiting to be revealed. When they arrived at the town archives, Carter led her down a narrow hallway to a small dimly lit room at the back of the building. It was filled with old boxes, stacks of papers, and dusty books, a place where history was stored, long forgotten by the townspeople. Carter reached for a heavy file box from the top shelf and placed it on the table. The papers inside were yellowed with age, the edges curled from years of neglect. "This is where it all began," Carter said, his voice low. "Victor Armstrong's experiments were just a ripple. What happened here, what continues to happen, goes back much further." He flipped open the first page of the file, revealing maps and photographs from the town's early days, many marked with strange symbols. As Emma examined the photos, she recognized some of the landmarks: old houses, the church, the forest, but there were others too, locations she had never seen before. As Carter flipped through the file, Emma's eyes were drawn to a series of photographs at the back. The images were black and white, old and faded, but they told a story that Emma wasn't prepared for. The photos showed early settlers of Brookhaven standing together in front of an ancient-looking stone structure, their faces solemn and unreadable. In the background, she could just make out the silhouette of the very clearing where they had destroyed the altar. "These were taken during the town's founding," Carter said, his voice thick with regret. "The settlers weren't just here to build homes. They came seeking something, a power that they believed would keep them safe, something dark and dangerous." Emma leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "What kind of power?" Carter closed the file with a sharp snap. "The kind of power that can warp reality. The kind that leaves its mark for generations. Victor Armstrong didn't just happen upon this place by chance. He was drawn here like many others before him." The weight of his words hung in the air. Emma could feel the unsettling truth sinking in. This wasn't just about Armstrong or the creature. It was about something far older, a dark legacy buried beneath the town's history. Emma's mind was racing as she processed what she had just learned. The town, its founders, the rituals, everything was connected. The creature, Victor Armstrong's obsession, and the dark energy that had nearly consumed Brookhaven were all part of a much larger web that had been spun centuries ago. "This is bigger than we thought," Emma said quietly, looking at Carter. "It's not just about stopping Victor. We have to stop whatever is feeding this darkness. If we don't, it won't stop with Brookhaven." Carter nodded grimly. "That's why I kept these files locked away. There's a reason the town has been so quiet for so long. We've been living in the shadow of something we don't fully understand. And now we're going to have to face it." Emma's stomach tightened as the truth settled in. They were no longer just fighting to stop Victor. They were up against something much older, a force that had been influencing the town long before either of them were born. "We need to find out where this all leads," Emma said, determination filling her voice. "If there's a way to stop it, we have to find it. We can't let it spread." Carter met her gaze, his resolve hardening. "Agreed. Let's finish what we started." The quiet of the town was broken only by the distant sound of birdsong as Emma and Sheriff Carter left the archives, their steps heavy with the weight of their discovery. The streets of Brookhaven seemed different now, as if the fog that had clouded the town's secrets had lifted, only to reveal something far more terrifying. As they walked toward the center of town, Emma could feel the unease crawling up her spine. The darkness that had once been confined to the mansion and the woods had seeped into every corner of Brookhaven. The town was no longer just a peaceful place. It was a battleground for forces far beyond their control. "We need to get to the forest," Carter said, his voice tight. "There's a place there, hidden from the town. I'm not sure what we'll find, but it's where this all leads." Emma nodded, her resolve firm. They couldn't stop now. The truth had been uncovered, but it was only the beginning. There was more to this story, more to the town's history, that they had to face before they could truly end the nightmare. As they made their way to the forest, Emma knew one thing for certain. They were heading straight into the heart of the darkness. As Emma and Sheriff Carter entered the woods, the air seemed to thicken around them. heavy with an ancient energy that had been dormant for far too long. The trees loomed above them, their twisted branches reaching out like gnarled hands. The path they followed had long been forgotten by the town, overgrown with vines and leaves, as though nature itself was trying to hide the truth. The fog clung to the forest floor, swirling around their ankles, and Emma could feel the tension building in the air. There was something here, something older than anything she had encountered before. It was as if the very land was holding its breath, waiting for them to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. "We're getting close," Sheriff Carter muttered, his voice barely a whisper as he scanned the surroundings. "There's an old clearing up ahead. That's where it all began." Emma nodded, though her heart pounded in her chest. They had uncovered Victor Armstrong's connection to the town, but now they were about to face whatever ancient force had been behind everything, whatever had been hiding in the woods for centuries. The clearing appeared suddenly, as if it had been waiting for them. It was surrounded by massive ancient trees, their trunks twisted and knotted, and the ground was uneven, marked with strange symbols etched into the dirt. The air in the clearing was still, the silence almost suffocating. At the center of the space, a stone structure loomed, an altar of sorts, much larger than the one they had destroyed earlier. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The stones surrounding the altar were not just worn, they were alive with energy, pulsing with an otherworldly force. The symbols on the stones seemed to shimmer faintly, almost as if they were moving, reacting to their presence. "This is it," Sheriff Carter said, his voice barely audible. "This is where the ritual's true power lies." Emma could feel it now. Something powerful, ancient and dark was waiting for them in the center of the clearing. She knew they had reached the heart of the mystery, and she was about to learn just how deep the town's secrets went. As they stepped closer to the altar, Emma's footsteps faltered. The closer they got, the more intense the energy became. It was as though the air itself was thick with power, pulling at her, pressing down on her chest. She could feel the force of the ritual still lingering, its power waiting to be awakened once more. Sheriff Carter approached the altar slowly, his hand reaching out to touch one of the stones. "This is where the founders made their pact," he said quietly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They believed they could control the power here. They thought they could harness it, keep it safe. But it consumed them. It always does." Emma felt a chill run through her as the meaning of his words sank in. The settlers had come to Brookhaven searching for power, and they had found it, but at a terrible cost. The land had taken its toll on them, turning them into something not quite human, leaving behind a dark legacy that had lasted for generations. "We need to destroy this," Emma said, her voice shaking. "We have to end this, once and for all." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath them, sending a wave of unease through Emma's body. She turned quickly, her heart racing. The symbols on the altar began to glow brighter, the stones vibrating with power. The air was crackling now, alive with energy, and Emma could feel the very ground beneath her feet shifting. "Get back," Carter shouted, grabbing Emma by the arm and pulling her away from the altar. But it was too late. A deep, guttural sound reverberated through the trees, shaking the leaves and causing the stones around them to crack. The altar began to crack open, a dark shadow emerging from within. Emma could feel the temperature drop as an immense force rose from the ground. It wasn't just a creature this time. It was something far darker, a manifestation of the power that had been lying dormant in Brookhaven for centuries. The shadow grew larger, swirling with dark energy as it began to take shape, a figure formed of smoke and shadow, its eyes glowing a fiery red. Emma and Sheriff Carter stumbled backward, their feet slipping on the uneven ground. The dark figure rose higher, its form becoming more defined, its face twisted in a grotesque expression of fury and hunger. It was no longer just a creature, it was an embodiment of the town's curse, a force of pure darkness fueled by centuries of secrets and sacrifices. "We need to stop it now," Emma shouted, her voice filled with fear, but also a strange sense of determination. "We can't let it escape." Carter gripped his rifle tighter, but his hands were shaking. "We don't have enough firepower for this. It's not just physical, it's tied to this land, this power. Emma's eyes darted around the clearing, searching for something, anything they could use to fight back. That's when she noticed it, a large cracked stone lying near the altar, half buried in the ground. It was different from the others, etched with deeper, more intricate symbols. There! Emma pointed. If we can destroy that stone, it might break the link to the ritual. We need to get to it. The shadow snarled, its red eyes burning with rage as it turned toward them. The battle was far from over. With no time to waste, Emma and Sheriff Carter charged toward the cracked stone. The shadow creature lunged, but Emma threw herself forward, grabbing a large branch from the ground and swinging it at the creature's form. The shadow recoiled, momentarily distracted, allowing Carter to reach the stone. He raised his rifle high, slamming it against the stone with all his might. The impact sent a shockwave through the clearing, and the creature let out a terrible inhuman screech as the stone cracked. The force of the ritual's energy began to unravel, the shadows flickering and twisting as the stone shattered into pieces. For a moment, everything was still. The fog began to dissipate, the oppressive air lifting as the power that had bound the creature to the land faded away. The figure howled one final time before it disintegrated, leaving nothing but darkness in its wake. Emma and Sheriff Carter stood in the clearing, breathing heavily, their bodies trembling with the aftermath of the battle. The town of Brookhaven was quiet once more. But Emma knew that this peace was fragile. They had destroyed the creature, but the darkness that had fueled it was still a part of Brookhaven's history. And as long as the town's past remained buried, there would always be a chance that it could rise again.